Just waiting for the full room to join us, but thanks very much for coming along and making some time to be with ourselves at the Co-operative Party today. Really appreciate it. We'll just wait until everyone is with us, and I'll make sure we kick off just in and around time. So thanks very much. Okay, I can see we're getting there. Friends, thank you. Thank you for making the time. Thank you for coming to debate, discuss, and to hear about some of the work the Co-op Party's done as well. You know, I think it's a marvellous opportunity we have tonight to talk about some of, in my mind, some of the most important themes for economic and community change post-COVID. We are delighted to be joined by the Chancellor Anneliese Dodds, Labour and Co-operative member as well. Thank you very much for being here, Anneliese. Really appreciate you making some time today. The way this call is going to work, friends, is that there's 2 bits of housekeeping. I've got 3 bits of housekeeping I've got to do at the start. 1, my name's Joe Fortune. I'm the General Secretary of the Co-operative Party. I introduce myself. Number 2, just to let you know that the call is being recorded. We've been doing many of these Cooperation Live calls. Some of you may well be used to the way in which we do it, but we do record it. And we record it so that the content is available on YouTube after this, so that colleagues who aren't able to join us today have an opportunity to catch up. So if you don't want yourself to appear for any reason on this call, do feel free just to tip the camera off. So your face won't appear on any recording. Secondly, just in relation to making the call move as smoothly as possible, the way we're going to do it is we're going to keep everyone on mute. You'll hear from Anneliese and from Birley, our policy officer, as well. So you'll see them on the screen. The opportunity for Q&A after we've heard from Anneliese and Anna. There's 3 ways we'll do that. We've asked for some pre-submitted questions, so some colleagues on the call, some friends on the call have put some of those in, so I've got those already. You can indicate that you'd like to ask a question by raising your virtual hand. You'll find that at the bottom of your screen, and also feel free to pop it into the chat function as well. Colleagues are on the call, they'll pop the questions through to ourselves, myself and Anna, and I'll be able to dish them out as appropriate as the Q&A goes on. So 3 ways, and I think there's an email address as well, mail@party.coop, should you want to email a question as well. So 3 ways for asking the questions. Outside of that housekeeping, today we've launched Owning the Future. Owning the Future is our Co-operative Party, the start of the Co-operative Party's contribution on the way in which we think that both community and the economy would benefit from increased cooperation as a result and afterwards of what the crisis that we are experiencing and coming through, hopefully. I think that it builds on some of our most important work over the last few years. It builds on what we've done in terms of community wealth building. It builds upon the work that the Co-operative Party has been doing in terms of community cooperation, our work locally and nationally as well, in terms of democratic public ownership. What does that mean? But also, over the last 2 or 3 years, something that we've been doing with Anneliese and with other colleagues was the rapid expansion of the need for the rapid expansion of the cooperative sector. The double the size of the cooperative sector was a piece which the Labour Party committed to, as you may know, ahead of the last 2 elections. What it gave us chance to do was really look at the way in which you can very quickly inject cooperative principles, cooperative business into the economy. Now, if you look at what we've been through over the last 12 weeks, we can see that never more so than never that we require that increase. So there's 3 aspects, but I'm going to stop because I could do the 40 minutes and I will not. And Anneliese will be texting me saying that to get off, and Anna Birley will come round to my house and kick the door down, I suspect. But all I'm going to say is it is marvellous to have Anneliese Dodds with us. I'm going to kick off with Anneliese. Anneliese, an expert in these areas, share some thoughts in these areas, and then I'm going to bring Anna Birley in to talk about the work, and we'll kick off then with the discussion. So Anneliese, thank you very much, and it's over to yourself.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Joe, and it's so lovely to see so many of you here, and thank you all very much for the work that you're doing, because I know how hard cooperators have been working in their communities, both obviously through the work of the cooperative group and the huge amount of effort it's been putting in to help the vulnerable very often, but also of course through those mutual aid groups as well. And when I look at all of that, I say to myself, that's what solidarity is, and it's also what cooperation is. So thanks from me, genuinely. I think this report is a critically important one, a very, very, very important one. And I think it's coming at a very critical time, because we're seeing, I think right now, what the value of our economy actually is, what we hold to be important now, and how that's changed perhaps from the past. We've seen how, in particular, many of those workers who are so important, whether that's in our public services or those delivery drivers, retail workers and others who are keeping our economy going, we've seen how they have not been valued in the way that they should have been in the past, and how we need to ensure that they are valued into the future. But I think we're also, many of us, seeing how we need a new relationship with business into the future, what I've called a new social contract with business. And I think there are some really important ideas in this report and suggestions about how that can be changed into the future. You know, what the report describes as cooperative values are those values that many businesses have been following for a long time, but of course we know very, very many others have not been, and that's been really exposed as a result of this crisis again. And clearly this is critically important when it comes to some of the big issues that are on the agenda right now. You know, sadly, because of the social distancing measures, of course, we're seeing very many parts of the economy requiring public support. That needs to be provided, but we need to make sure that when businesses receive that public value is being delivered as well. They need to have green strings attached and strings of fairness attached as well. Exactly the kinds of issues that the Cooperative Party has been pushing on for a very long time. And I know that you're going to be doing more work around fair taxation in this context, around corporate behaviour, corporate governance, employee engagement, many of those labour market issues that are really so important right now. But I think also, just to finish, and really want to hear people's points of view and questions, another critically important element that this report draws attention to is the role of the cooperative movement, especially in those communities that were so often struggling previously. And there's a really important part of this report focusing on the inequalities that existed in our economy before and how they need to be dealt with. Of course, they've been laid bare, horribly bare, by what's happened with this horrendous disease. But we've seen time and time again that it is cooperatives, mutual, social enterprise, different forms of economic activity that have often been the first to move into some of the most economically deprived areas after crisis. They've been the ones which have built up local economies. They've been the ones who have viewed economies as based around places as well. And I know that's something that the Cooperative Party is working on, place-based economies. And they're going to be critical for our future as we try and push demand back up, as we try and make our communities economically resilient again. We know that cooperatives make economic sense. They tend to be, as businesses in the private sector, much more resilient, often than other kinds of ownership form. We need to be focusing on that for the health of our local economies into the future. So I'm really, really pleased to be starting off this conversation with all of you, and I'm looking forward to see how it develops. So thanks again for the invitation.
Thanks, Anneliese. Thanks for that introduction to the call. It's fantastic to have yourself as such an ardent cooperator in the job that you are. Another ardent cooperator on the call is Anna Birley. Anna, you've done so much pulling this initial part of our report together. You'll explain the way in which the work's going to develop, no doubt. Anna, if you want to give all of us on the call the benefit of the insight from your perspective, someone who's pulled this work together, that'd be fantastic. Anna, over to yourself.
Thank you, and it's really exciting to see so many other ardent cooperators on the call as well. And thank you, Anneliese, for your time this evening and contributions. So I'm really excited about this report, Owning the Future. I'm going to take a short moment to tell you what it's about, but hopefully you've all received a copy in your inboxes as well and have had a look through and come with some questions. So essentially the report is based on the idea that after every crisis we have a window of opportunity, not just to recover from that crisis, but to understand and fix the root causes of it as well. And so the choices we make now are going to shape our future economy in the long term. And as the lockdown eases, we face this severe recession. The Bank of England is saying the most severe recession in 300 years. And we have a choice, either to return to the status quo and the kind of economy we had before, or rewrite some of those rules so that we shape a different kind of economy that hardwire some of our values into it. And I think this comes at a really exciting moment because through lockdown, among all of the hardship we saw and the devastation that coronavirus has caused, we also saw an outburst of cooperation. And Anneliese Dodds mentioned the mutual aid groups that have blossomed, the ways that we've helped our neighbours, the ways that cooperatives and community businesses have played a massive role in helping their communities and the environment during this crisis. And the report looks at ways in which actually doing business like that helps to reduce inequality, and that by reducing inequality we set ourselves up for a much more sustainable and resilient growth. That if we don't reduce inequality, we risk our growth being short-lived. Before every crisis we see a widening of the gap between the rich and poor. So if we want to prevent future crisis and be more resilient to, God forbid, another pandemic or any other shock that hits economies as they do, we need to change the way our economy functions. And that's what this report seeks to set out. I wouldn't be true to myself if I didn't say that the answer is more co-ops. And anyone who's ever come across me knows that that's usually my answer to most questions, but hopefully we're able to flesh out a lot more detail about what a more cooperative society means in terms of reducing socio-economic inequality, how we widen ownership, and particular mechanisms we can put in place post-COVID in order to achieve that in the context that we find ourselves in. So looking at the risk to jobs and livelihoods, for example, businesses pulling out of areas. I was just hearing today about potential closures in a part of South Wales where hundreds of people are going to find themselves unemployed. Well, actually, how do we create a cooperative solution that gives those people the tools they need and the support they need to buy back that business and run it as a workers-owned co-op so that they can keep those jobs in the local area? So loads of examples of policy ideas like that coming through. We're going to be putting them out every week. So not only do you get to talk about those ideas in the big picture and some of the inequalities we face now in the round today, every week we're going to be looking at a different theme and coming up with plans and solutions and cooperative ideas that will contribute hopefully to the wider debate happening on what that recovery needs to look like. So see this is our starting point. I know that there are so many ideas in the Cooperative Party and we're blessed with a membership and network who love to contribute. So please do keep sending your ideas through because they'll be able to feed into the development of this work and the plans that we put out on fair tax, on employee ownership, on a green recovery every week for the next few weeks. I think it'd be bereft of me if I didn't plug the link. So you can go to party.coop/owning the future and you'll be able to have a look at the list of ideas we've got coming out and the dates we're putting them out so that you can get your ideas to me in time. And I will hand back to Joe so that I can take any questions and hear some of your questions for Anneliese as well.
Lovely stuff. Thanks, Anna. And you will have got this report in your inbox as part of the sign up for the call. Of course, it would have come through. You'll be able to scroll through the recommendations, and as Anna said, look forward to the pieces of the report which mean most to you as and when they come up over the coming weeks. Look, I said at the start that there was 3 or 4 different ways of coming up with your questions. So I have got a couple to kick us off. Again, if you do wish to raise your hand, show that you would like to ask a question, do so. Do pop it into the chat box or do send it through the email. But our first question is one which came in through the day. It's one about real cooperative and social enterprise development. It's talking about what grants, loans, rents, training is a lot packed in the back end of this. It's come in from Dennis from Liverpool, what grants, loans, rents, training are required, or can the Labour Party and Co-operative Party recommend to get cooperatives and social enterprise up and running here and now? So I think it's one where we've touched upon in the work. So I'll start with Anna, and then Anneliese, bring you in as well on that one. So Anna, over to yourself.
Thank you very much. And you know, it sounds like a question from after my own heart, that certainly has to be at the heart. We've been looking at sort of some of those plans for cooperative expansion. That's the second plan we'll be putting out, and that speaks to work we've been thinking about around how we create regional and national cooperative development agencies, and the kind of funding barriers that cooperatives face, so that we can create the capital instruments they need to grow, make sure we've got expertise embedded in local authorities to be able to promote the cooperative and social entrepreneurs that are sort of desperate to get the economy restarted in a different way. I think that, you know, what we've got at the moment is an unlevel playing field, and the rules are written to promote privately owned and shareholder owned businesses, not cooperatives. So it's about creating a level playing field where we reward the kind of corporate behaviours that we value, embed cooperation into the DNA of every business, and make sure that cooperatives have got all of the tools they need to be able to succeed.
Anneliese, over to you on the same point. I know it's something you've been thinking about for a little while as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree totally with what Anna said about, I suppose, future development of the cooperative sector and the kinds of things that government needs to be thinking about and what we'll be pushing them on. I suppose also I just wanted to briefly say, I think it's also very important that the existing economic package reflects the reality of cooperatives across the country. And, you know, I've been very concerned to raise, you know, a number of times with different ministers, concerns around whether those packages do necessarily reflect the reality of how many cooperatives work. We've just seen some new rules around insolvency as well, where there was concerns around whether they would be fitted to the reality of cooperatives. You know, it looks like there have been some changes made to those because of pressure that we've applied. So I think it's just getting into that mindset that Anna I think rightly referred to, that so often, you know, cooperatives just aren't thought about as an ownership form when Treasury is coming up with different proposals, and we're really trying to make sure that they do think about cooperatives as I mentioned, a really critical element of how we're going to be, you know, developing those local economies into the future, particularly in more deprived areas. So it's really good to be having this conversation about all of that now.
Yeah, you know, we've seen only in the last couple of weeks the government taking away, looking to take away potential tax breaks for social enterprise, in particular SITR, something in the finance bill this week or next week, I think, Anneliese. I know that you and the team have been fighting the fight to try and get that put back in, is something for social enterprise in particular and charities to be able to take advantage of and to develop. But again, we see the government not necessarily agreeing with ourselves in the best ways in which to stimulate different types of business form. I'm going to read one of the other questions out that we've had pre-submitted. But Norman Rimmell, Paul Evans, Adam Fox, I'll put you on notice. I'll be throwing over to yourselves after this one. So the next one comes in from Glenn. Glenn's talking, Glenn Burton. He's new to the Co-op Party. Hello, Glenn. Welcome. We've had a fantastic membership increase and for ourselves, a surge over the last few months. It's hopefully really reflective of the way in which people are seeing politics, seeing the economy. Means that people, hopefully like Glenn and others, coming towards the Co-operative Party. Welcome. Glenn's asking about post offices, and it's about that community cooperation. He's saying, is there ways of we can use cooperative values to protect some of these key facilities into the future? It's the other side of the coin. Some parts of this report are systemic, are bigger picture pieces in terms of the economy, but of course there is nothing more important than the community cooperation which goes on in terms of assets, in terms of work at local level. So Anna, this may be an opportunity for yourself just to talk a bit very quickly about Love It List It and some of our work in that area, and then I'll flick over to Norman and others.
I promised that we didn't pay Glenn to ask us a question that we like the answer to, but we do have a campaign around protecting local assets and increasing cooperative and community business at a very local level. We're seeing that, you know, high streets are being decimated, the services that we rely on and the assets we value are at risk of being privatised or closed down, and in lots of communities it might be their last sort of link to the services they rely on. So post offices, I've recently listed a nursery in my neighbourhood as an asset of community value. So look at Love It Listed. It's a campaign we're running, and it's got all of the resources and advice you need to be able to do things like save your local post office and bring it into cooperative management available for you. And I'm sure that we'll be able to circulate the link to that to participants afterwards.
That's great, cheers. Look, I'm going to, as I say, Norman, I'm coming to yourself, Norman Rimmell. Rimmell, also do remember to be raising your hand if you want to be like Norman and ask a question up front. So Norman, you'll be unmuted, and then if you're able to ask away, okay?
Can you hear me?
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, good. Yeah, I haven't read the report yet. I look forward very much to reading it. Sounds extremely interesting. So my question is slightly wider, I think. At the time of the 2008 crisis, it was realised that the government or the state was the banker of last resort. This time, it's the government or the state that is the employer of last resort. Now, I do think that when this pandemic is over, that the public sector, one way or the other, and I include the cooperative movement in that, is going to become the employer of last resort, or a much bigger employer than it was before.
Okay, thanks, Norman. Perhaps start with yourself, Anneliese, sort of reflections from 2008, but also, you know, where we find ourselves after this one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a very, very interesting question. And actually, if we compare what happened following 2008-9 and the kind of crisis that we're in now, I think it's going to be a very, very different situation, particularly around unemployment. I mean, it wasn't necessarily a positive thing for the huge numbers of people who saw their living standards squeezed for such a long time. But in practice, the overall economic context meant that a lot of that labour was absorbed. You know, there wasn't a huge amount of investment going on. You know, we saw a very, very slow growth of that in the UK, and to an extent a substitution of capital with labour occurring for quite a long time. So as you know, we had very relatively low unemployment in the UK after the 2008-9 financial crisis, but a very, very long squeeze, as I said, on living standards. Now, that won't be the case with this crisis. We are seeing, unfortunately, relatively high levels of unemployment. I think they will be made worse than they need to be because of the one-size-fits-all approach that's being taken by the Treasury, where they're treating every sector the same. They're treating shielded people the same as non-shielded, and so on and so forth. But then there are big questions about, as you said, how we can actually try and both retain employment and support it into the future. I know the Co-op Party actually are planning to look at this, which is going to be really useful for us. I think there's a whole range of areas we need to be looking at. So both potentially increasing kind of labour intensity of existing sectors. So, you know, we knew there was a massive recruitment crisis in social care even before this terrible pandemic hit us. You know, 120,000 vacancies, they must be filled into the future. So we need to increase labour intensity in some areas. We need to do so while making sure that work is decent work, that it's properly paid, etc. But then we also need to think about how we can increase labour intensity in some parts of the private sector as well, where it'll be possible to do that, and still firms staying afloat. So lots of the regulatory questions, I think, pop up here around how we can produce a more environmentally friendly economy, but one which is upskilling the workforce and potentially pulling in some more labour whilst doing so. So I think it's a really important question, Norman.
Thanks, Norman. Anna, just before I start taking questions in bunches, but given it's such a fundamental, maybe you want to comment on that one, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I think jobs is something we've really been thinking about, and who employs you and how they treat you. And in that sort of, obviously in a work-around environment, a group of employees who are also owners of the business aren't going to vote themselves redundant. They're going to make decisions that create a long-term sustainable firm rather than decisions that sort of outsource their own livelihoods abroad. But I think that it is going to be a very different environment that we've seen ourselves than what we've seen ourselves in before. We're going to see lots of firms who have relied on furlough, seeing as that transitions out without the right things in place to incentivise keeping employees on. I think there's a risk also that we see firms shedding employees in order to pay back loans that were actually saw themselves over leveraged. So we've been thinking a bit about what we do around the coronavirus business interruption loans as well. But yes, to come, I think job retention and employee ownership is the 29th of June. So watch this space as well.
We all just have to hang on just that little bit longer potentially, but no, thanks, Anna. Look, I'm going to take 3 questions. We've proved the theory that it works, so we're going to take some questions in bunches so that we can get as many in as possible. So I'm going to take Paul Evans, Adam Fox and David Smith. Paul, you're on first. As soon as you're unmuted, fire away. Paul.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely, mate.
Thank you. My name's Paul Evans. I'm a Labour Party member and a member of the Co-operative Party in Finchley and Golders Green. I'm also an official at the trade union BEC2, and we represent freelancers. We're quite unusual in the trade union movement in the sense that we represent a lot. The majority of people I represent are freelancers, not employees, so to speak. And there's 2 cooperative solutions that I think have really been highlighted by the coronavirus crisis. I think there's a real opportunity here. Firstly, for the most part, outside of certain sectors like film, TV and theatre, to my knowledge, those people aren't unionised and they have been left very badly in the lurch by the coronavirus crisis without any real income. So it's highlighted that we need to deal with income protection and measures that could even out earnings. And there are 2 cooperative solutions that I'd like to put to the Co-op Party, as something that could be explored a bit more. The first one is a viable mutualised income protection plan, as opposed to an insurance-based one, and it could receive tax-free contributions from employers. That'd give people who are freelancers the income during unpredicted periods of unemployment, like this one, but also provide for welfare rights that employees have, things like parental leave and sickness, etc. So if the Co-op Party could throw its weight behind campaigning for tax-free contributions to income protection plans for freelancers, and if those income protection plans could be mutualised ones, that would be really excellent. The second thing is the idea of limited liability partnerships. Many freelancers, particularly working in the film and television industry, they get a lot of work, but they don't know where their next job's coming from, and often they can lose work quite rapidly and unpredictably. And the idea of having a limited liability partnership where they could spread out their earnings and where they could receive a lot of the benefits of employees, that could be, that could be very much a cooperative solution, to be creating a cooperative company that would really create a safety net that isn't there for freelancers at the moment. And we've had some awful stories in BEC2. The majority of our members are not earning any income at all. They've fallen through all the cracks in the job retention scheme, in the self-employed support scheme. Many of them, employers have forced them to trade through limited companies, and they've not been able to get any help. The government all think they all, go to work on a yacht or a helicopter. They think they're earning £200,000 a year. Most of them aren't. Many of them earning £30,000 or £40,000 a year are being treated like they're billionaires.
Thank you, Paul. Fantastic contribution. Adam Fox, yourself, as soon as you're muted, fire away.
Thanks very much. So my name is Adam Fox. I'm a councillor in Colchester. I'm a cabinet member for housing. So as local authorities, we've been really encouraged to become more commercial over recent years. It's a real challenge at the moment in that we've been hit with the lack of income coming in, as well as the additional costs that we've had to have as part of the response to COVID. And we've established things like an energy company and a housing company. But I would be really interested in Anneliese's ideas on how councils could be kind of further encouraged to make those sorts of commercial enterprises much more cooperative. We're really keen as Labour and Co-op councillors to invest in community wealth building and the like, but I'm interested in what Anneliese's thoughts might be on what we can do in the future.
Great, thanks, Adam. And finally, in this round, David Smith, if he's able to be unmuted. David, if you can hear us, you can.
Yes, I'm
fire away.
Thank you, Joe. Good evening, everyone. I'm always highly delighted and enthused, like Anna, when I hear reports and politicians talking about doubling the cooperative economy. And then I actually think, well, where are all these potential cooperators going to come from to run this as a cooperative organisation? Because we're not wanting to create hollow organisations that are top-down driven. So my question is, how do we get this balance between doubling the co-op economy on the one hand and nurturing grassroots self-help enterprises through support for citizen-led organisations, specifically at the local level? So we're really grounded in what's happening in communities rather than it just being, something which is superficial. Thank you.
Thanks, David. David, you're disagreeing violently with Brad in the chat box, who's telling me that double the size is far, far too meek an ambition, that we should be much more ambitious.
I would agree with that, but my point still, remains.
I know. But look, thanks for that. There's three really big questions. So we're going to try and be as quick as we can with our answers, but we've got Paul on the self-employed and the experience of it allied with the two ideas, which perhaps we'll come back to specifically. Adam in terms of community wealth building and local councils, and David in terms of nurturing the co-operators within what we wish to do with the economy. So who wants to kick us off? Anneliese, do you want to sort of take a couple of those points, and then Anna sort of come in after, and we'll move on. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. And thanks so much to everybody for the critical questions. I mean, Paul, you're absolutely right about the situation facing so many freelancers. It's absolutely terrible for them, to be honest. And it's a particular problem in our country, of course, because our social security is so weak at protecting people's incomes compared to in just about every other comparable nation. I mean, we could say, well, our nation at our level of industrialization, I suppose we could have contrasted it with the US, but actually even they have substantially boosted their unemployment support. We're far, far behind, even with the changes that have occurred. I think that does mean that we need to have more of a focus on income protection. We're certainly looking very, very carefully into this area around the labour market, because we've heard from Rishi Sunak that there will be a new settlement for self-employed people around taxation. Well, if there's going to be more taxation that will need to be paid, we need to have additional security for those people as well. It can't be just in one direction. So it's certainly something that we're concerned about. Secondly, the last two questions I think actually relate quite closely together, because they're about how we can promote a localised response to many of these issues. And Adam, well done for what you've been doing. I think the first thing we must prevent is councils being disincentivized from doing what Colchester has been doing, and many, many other councils, which is having that kind of, place shaping, grounded approach to creating value in local economies. And if we have a situation where, as has been threatened, the lost income will not be replaced for local councils, and not even the spending either, then actually you could see councils being penalised for doing the kind of thing that you've been doing. So that must be prevented, and certainly I'm doing all I can to indicate to the Chancellor that these were sensible decisions, sensible areas for councils to move into, and they're going to be critical to revitalising local economies. So they need our support rather than being damaged. And I suppose that relates to the question that David posed. I think we're seeing in many cases people coming together through the different mutual aid organisations, often working with forward-looking local authorities, often Labour ones, I have to say, but some of other political complexions as well, to create that support. In many cases, that's actually developing into forward-looking proposals for economically viable social enterprises or cooperatives or other interesting outcomes. Now, the big problem we've got in the UK currently is that I think that the sector as a whole does brilliant work to help advise people who want to create a cooperative, etc. But we don't have that support coming from government. We don't have it being supported financially. Obviously, Labour said at the last election that that's got to change, that we need to have that kind of cooperative development unit. I can't remember exactly what we called it, or something like that, within government. And really, we need to have that extra support as well, so that people can quickly get those responses that they need. As I say, the sector's doing a great job, but we need to do, I think, more from government as well, would be my advice on that.
That's great, and Anna, I know we're keen to get as many questions in. A couple of things potentially just to add before I bring others in.
I think sort of on the bottom up, top down comment from David, I agree with everything Anneliese says. I think that part of the role of a cooperative development agency, whether it's national or regional or workers within your local authority doing this, is some of that is about generating demand to cooperate and showing that it's a viable option. It's not taught in school, it's not taught in university or in colleges. It's not very easy to start a co-op, and you often need to be able to access advice. You need to be shown where there are opportunities. The Wales Cooperative Centre does a really fabulous job of working with cooperatives and social enterprises and community groups to be able to highlight where there are opportunities for them to get contracts, for example. So I think there's a facilitation role, not a top-down direction role, that that agency or body might play, and I think education is really important as well. On the freelancers and the co-op solutions, please always send ideas, Paul. You can email me at policy@party.coop, and I would read them with great gratitude for any thinking you've been doing. I suggest having a look at the psychologist cooperative in Preston that the council has given support to start, but it's a group of freelance psychology professionals who have come together to provide exactly that kind of mutual support. They're called Link Psychology Cooperative. And I think the other thing to note is sort of particularly in the creative sector, we're really lucky that in our parliamentary group to have Tracy Brabin, who has done a lot of thinking around how we support freelancers to cooperate and give them the support and rights in the workplace that other people enjoy. So certainly something on our radar, and thank you for raising.
Great stuff. Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm going to take another three. Look, what I would say is the Co-op Party has some developing and fantastic networks of members knocking around and developing at the minute. So we've had one in from a member of the steering committee of the Disability Network talking about disabled people already having very low unemployment rates. Through COVID, we've seen that this has been impacted further. Is there something specific we need within our own plans for on in the future on that area, but maybe for Anneliese to comment on as well? So that's in from Janice. I am going to throw over to with Hazel Blears. Hazel's had her hand up. Hazel, thanks very much for joining the call. If we're able to unmute Hazel, fire away.
Yeah, delighted to be able to take part. And first of all, congratulations to Anneliese on her post. I think it's a really great thing that she's in there, and so co-op. She talks about public value. I think I'd just like to ask her, having taken the Social Value Act through Parliament in my last days there, is there a commitment to strengthen that act? Because I really do believe that it's made a big difference to private companies in looking at the social, economic and environmental impact that they've made. And the second bit of legislation I'm really interested in is there's a lot of talk at the moment about building a new economy, building back better after COVID, doing things differently. And obviously in the co-op group, we've got a very different business model. We're a mutual. So really, Anneliese, my question is, would you support legislation that actually changes the Companies Act? So instead of the primacy being about profit and shareholders, it's actually more about purpose, and also bringing in a wider range of stakeholders like the community, the colleagues who work in the enterprise, that wider sense of stakeholders. We really, I think, we need to change the Companies Act to give businesses who want to change, and some of them do, the freedom to be able to operate in a different legislative environment.
Thank you very much, Hazel. That's fantastic. I will take one more in the round. If there are other members on the call from some of our networks, and you specifically want to get in, do make sure you raise your hand or put it into the chat box. I'll be really keen to hear from you. But I'll go to Theodore Michael as well, the last one in this round, and I know I'm pushing my time. I think every time I have a chat with Anneliese, I push my time, Anneliese, so give me the eyes as and when I've really run out of time, but thank you very much. Theodore.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Theo. I'm Vice Chair of Mason and West Kent Co-operative Party. I'm just touching on a question that Adam asked and also on something that Anneliese and Anna said earlier, which is how do we actually sort of inform and educate councils and governments and people about the Co-operative Party and the co-operative movement? I mean, when I joined the Co-operative Party a few years ago, many people and even members of the Labour Party thought I was actually leaving the Labour Party as well. So I'm just thinking, how do we actually spread our message and bring it across? Thank you.
Thank you. Great one. Anneliese, I'll come to you first on Hazel's question specifically, but also some comments in and around the particular challenges faced by disabled members of our community as well. So Anneliese, on those two.
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much again to everybody who asked these really pertinent questions as well. First of all, around the kind of corporate governance context, I think you're right, Hazel. I mean, this really does need to be looked at. I mean, I would say there are questions about compliance even with existing legislation, but also about the two acts that you mentioned. I think we also don't see the kinds of reporting necessarily by companies that we would need to see in order to understand whether they are adhering to Social Value Act. And I think there's a lot more that government could do there to bring different private reporting mechanisms together so that we can have a better overview of this. But I do think that piece needs to be looked at very carefully. I would say I get the impression when I talk to business, there are quite a few initiatives and thoughts about doing this already that have been put on the agenda, but we need to be really kind of focusing on those in the future. I think also in a context where I found after the last financial crisis that some parts of business were saying, look, let's not look at regulatory questions, just let us get on with it. But of course, it was those regulatory issues that had led to many of the problems in the first place. So we do need to have that focus going forward. Around the question about people with disabilities and the labour market, I think that's incredibly important. And, as was revealed, in fact, by this excellent report, we're really seeing how not just inequalities are impacting on health outcomes, but they're impacting incredibly strongly on how people are experiencing the economic fallout from coronavirus. We're seeing larger numbers of people in groups that are traditionally disadvantaged being furloughed, for example, and also losing their jobs. And of course, as was mentioned, people with disabilities have a low level of employment anyway, and we're likely to see even more issues with that going forward. As I said before, we don't have any approach at all from government for those who are shielding, literally nothing. The assumption is that employers will just be able to keep people on in that circumstance, and that there should be a conversation between the employer and the employee. Well, if we're looking at, I don't know, say Mid-Counties Co-operative or something, I might have confidence in that, but I know that would not necessarily be the kind of, mutualist and respectful conversation that would be needed in many other workplaces. So it is very important. And we're particularly thinking about how we can try and situate these issues within our calls on government around unemployment support and protection. So yeah, thanks very much for raising that.
Theo, I'm going to take the liberty of answering your question right at the end, if that's okay. I'll come back to that, and don't let me forget. Vivian in the chat is thanking Anna, which I think I should say. We should have said, if I haven't said enough through the call, we should make sure that is on the YouTube record. Fantastic report, says Vivian. Really appreciate it. However, the sting in the tail is a very hard question for Anneliese, which was in and around. It goes back to financial crisis 2008 on. we felt that there was the mutual moment, 2008-10. We felt that it needed to change. We felt that there was opportunity and motive. What's different this time is the thrust of where Vivian's getting to. Anneliese, I think that's a great one for yourself. We've all got our views about how we've experienced the last 12 weeks, but from your perspective.
Yeah, I must say I'm very used to Vivian asking difficult questions if it's the same Vivian as the one that I
suspect it may be.
but always important ones, and it's a very, very important one. I mean, I think it is different this time, but of course we need to seize the fact that it is different and make sure that we get change out of it. Why do I think it's different? Because the last crisis, of course, was very, very much focused, and it's an obvious thing to say, but it was very much focused on the financial sector. It didn't open up a more generalised discussion about the role of business and business responsibility. I think that is different this time. I think people are looking at the role of the private sector. I mean, I look at what's going on across our economy, and I see how those who are creating value, as I mentioned before, they're in the public sector, they're in the private sector, they're mutuals, cooperatives, social enterprise. They're people who are supporting all of us. And I think we are having that questioning now about, you know, what's a lot of this economy for? You know, what are the critical elements of it? I think that's different. I also think we've got a very cohesive group of Labour and cooperative MPs. You know, we work together very, very closely. We're concerned to make sure that we use these opportunities. And I think actually to be fair to, well, at least one of the Conservative ministers has shown himself to be more receptive to some of these arguments as well. But, you know, we've got to build all of this. We've got to make sure that those arguments are front and centre. And so you're probably not going to like me passing the buck here, but I think that is going to be down to all of us, actually. All of us making that case right across the country. It's going to be so important.
Yeah, thanks, Anneliese. And look, I've stolen minutes, but there's many more minutes where these ones have come from. Over the period of time, we'll be issuing chapters of the report. We'll be looking at in-depth, deep dives at each one of the policy recommendations. Fantastic future opportunity to get involved in this debate. Theo was asked a question there in the piece about how can we get the Co-op Party's message out further. And I think the sucker that I would give Theo, we're now 60,000 supporters. With 12,000 members, we're able to hit over 100,000 people on any given day, and we regularly do. We're growing. I think our ideas are growing. I think the party is gaining confidence, it's gaining size. Anneliese is absolutely right. It's down to the hundreds on this call, and the other calls that I think we've done 3 or 4 calls every week of similar size. It's up to ourselves. I think that there is self-help. One of the cooperative principles. We're having a go. I think we're getting there. I think we're improving. I think we're honing the way in which we're communicating. But as Anna said through the call, we're open to new ideas. If there's things that you think that we're missing the trick on, if you think there's aspects of the Co-op Party or the cooperative ideal that we need to sharpen up at, you can let us know. You know where we are. You know where I am. You give us a shout. But we are growing. We are getting our message across. As Anna, with people like Anneliese in positions that she is, we've got fantastic champions in exactly the right spots in order for the cooperative movement to progress and to feel that confidence and feel that love from politics and policy makers. I thank Anna for the report. I thank Anneliese for the time and the expertise. It's a great piece of work. It's an important piece of work which will be evolving. If you haven't had a look, have a look. Engage with the coming chapters. Engage with the party's policy as it evolves in all areas, and have a look at our campaigns as well. Thank you very much for the time. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for questions today, but as I say, there'll be other times and other opportunities for cooperators to get together. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening. Bye bye now. Bye bye.